Hold something in your hand right now. A phone, a cup, a pillow. Feel the weight of it, the texture. Now imagine trying to make that object using only rocks. No metal, no machines, just stone against stone. It seems impossible. And yet our ancestors did things with rocks that we still can't fully explain. Here is what keeps archaeologists arguing late into the night. Some prehistoric tools are too good, too precise, too sophisticated for what we thought ancient humans were capable of. They require techniques that shouldn't have existed yet, skills that took us centuries to rediscover. We find blades so thin you can see light through them. We find symmetry so perfect, it looks machine. Made, we find evidence of techniques that modern knappers, people who make stone tools today, struggle to replicate even with all our knowledge. Something doesn't add up. If you are settling in for sleep tonight, this is the kind of mystery that rewards slow contemplation. No quick answers here, just the strange, beautiful puzzle of what our ancestors knew and how they knew it. Subscribe and stick around. To understand why certain tools are so puzzling, you need to understand how stone tool technology was supposed to progress. Archaeologists have a timeline, a sequence. Each stage building on the last, slowly advancing over millions of years. It is a neat story, maybe too neat. The earliest stone tools, called Oldowan tools, appeared around 2.6 million years ago. They're simple. Rocks with a few flakes knocked off to create a sharp edge. Not much to look at, but revolutionary for their time. The first technology for almost 1 million years. Not much changed. Generation after generation made essentially the same simple tools. Then, around 1.7 million years ago, something new appeared, the Acheulean hand axe. And this is where things start getting interesting. Acheulean hand axes are different. They're symmetrical, carefully shaped on both sides to create a teardrop or oval form. They fit perfectly in the hand. They're not just functional, they're beautiful, and they appeared suddenly without obvious precursors. Here is the first puzzle. Making an Acheulean hand axe requires holding a mental template in your mind, a vision of the finished tool, while removing dozens of flakes in precise sequence. It requires planning, abstraction, and fine motor control that simple choppers don't demand. How did tool makers jump from simple flake tools to these sophisticated objects? Where are the intermediate forms? The learning curve? It is as if someone went from banging rocks together to precision engineering with nothing in between. Some researchers argue the intermediates existed, but didn't survive. Stone tools preserve well, but not perfectly. Millions of years of erosion, burial, and destruction could have eliminated the evidence of gradual development. We might just be seeing the survivors. Others suggest the jump was real, that some cognitive breakthrough, maybe related to language or spatial reasoning, suddenly enabled new capabilities. A mental upgrade that transformed what humans could imagine and create. But here is what really puzzles researchers. Acheulean hand axes stayed almost unchanged for over 1 million years. Once the technology appeared, it barely evolved. The same basic design, made the same basic way, for 50,000 generations. Think about that. In the past 100 years, We've gone from horses to spacecraft. But for 1 million years, our ancestors made the same tool. Either they lacked the creativity to improve it, or it was already perfect for their needs. Neither explanation quite satisfies. And then there is the symmetry problem. Many Acheulean hand axes are more symmetrical than they need to be. A functional cutting tool doesn't require perfect bilateral symmetry. So why did ancient toolmakers invest the extra effort to make them beautiful? Some researchers think the symmetry was a signal, a way of showing off skill to potential mates or allies. The ability to make a beautiful tool demonstrated intelligence, patience, and coordination. It was prehistoric peacocking. Others think the symmetry emerged from the knapping process itself. When you remove flakes alternately from each side of a stone, symmetry naturally results. The beauty might be a byproduct of efficient technique rather than intentional artistry, but neither explanation accounts for the very best hand axes. The ones that go beyond symmetry into something approaching perfection. Objects that seem to embody a vision, a standard of excellence that transcends mere function. There is a hand axe in the British Museum known as the Boxgrove hand axe. It was made around 500,000 years ago, not by modern humans, but by Homo heidelbergensis, an earlier human species. And it is one of the finest stone tools ever found from any period. The Boxgrove hand axe is nearly perfectly symmetrical. Its edges are carefully worked to be uniformly sharp. Its proportions are elegant, almost artistic, and it was made by a species that we usually consider more primitive than ourselves. This creates a problem for our assumptions about cognitive evolution. We like to think that our species, Homo sapiens, represents the pinnacle of human mental development. But here is evidence that sophisticated aesthetic sense existed 500,000 years ago in a different species entirely. The Boxgrove makers left other evidence of sophisticated behavior. They hunted horses and rhinoceroses. They worked together in groups. They selected high-quality raw materials and worked them with great skill. In many ways, they were doing what we would do, and yet this species went extinct. Whatever capabilities they had weren't enough to survive. Eventually, our species replaced them, along with Neanderthals and all the other human varieties. Only we remain. Why? What did we have that they didn't? The tools don't tell us. The Boxgrove hand axe is as good as anything Homo sapiens produced in the same era. Maybe better. The technology wasn't the deciding factor, something else. Social organization, language, luck, climate adaptation determined who survived. This is humbling. We're here not because we were inevitably superior, but because of factors we don't fully understand. Our sophisticated tools, our artistic achievements, our complex technologies, they didn't make us uniquely successful. Other humans had similar capabilities. Let's move forward in time to an even stranger puzzle. Around 300,000 years ago, a new technique appeared called Levallois. And this is where things get really hard to explain. The Levallois technique involves carefully shaping a stone core before striking off a single predetermined flake. The toolmaker envisions the final product, then works backward to prepare the core that will produce it. It is like sculpture in reverse. Think about what this requires. You have to imagine a tool that doesn't exist yet. Then you have to figure out what shape of core would produce that tool. Then you have to nap the core to that precise shape then, and only then do you strike the final blow. Modern knappers who've mastered this technique describe it as incredibly difficult. It requires understanding how stone fractures at a deep level, predicting how force will travel through the material, accounting for imperfections and variations. It is engineering, and yet we find Levallois tools made by Neanderthals and early modern humans across Europe, Africa, and Asia. Thousands of sites, millions of tools. This wasn't a rare skill possessed by a few geniuses. It was widespread, standard practice for tens of thousands of years. How did this knowledge spread? Before writing, before the internet, before even extensive trade networks. How did toolmakers in France learn the same technique as toolmakers in South Africa? The scale of this technological transfer is hard to explain. One theory is convergent evolution. The Levallois technique might be an inevitable discovery for anyone who works with stone long enough. Different populations might have independently invented it because it is simply the best solution to certain problems. But the similarities are almost too precise for independent invention. The preparation methods, the striking platforms, the angles of the blows, they're remarkably consistent across sites separated by thousands of miles. It looks more like teaching than reinvention. This suggests something remarkable about prehistoric communication. Even without writing or formal education, complex technical knowledge could spread across entire continents. Our ancestors had ways of teaching and learning that we might underestimate. But here is where it gets stranger still. Some of the finest stone tools ever made come from much more recent periods, but they display craftsmanship that seems to exceed anything we'd expect from their era. In Denmark, archaeologists have found flint daggers from around 4,000 years ago that are almost impossibly thin. Some blades are less than a centimeter thick, but over 30 centimeters long. They're so delicate, they couldn't have been used as actual tools. Modern knappers have tried to replicate these daggers. Most fail. The few who succeed describe it as the most demanding work they've ever done. It requires controlling fractures in ways that push the limits of what stone can do. Let me tell you about what happens when modern people try to recreate prehistoric tools. Experimental archaeology is a whole field dedicated to this. Researchers try to replicate ancient technologies using only the materials and methods available to our ancestors. The results are humbling. Simple tools are relatively easy to recreate. Basic chopping tools, rough scrapers, these take practice, but skilled modern knappers can match prehistoric quality. But as tool complexity increases, the gap between ancient and modern achievements widens. For the most sophisticated prehistoric tools, modern experimenters often need multiple attempts, sometimes dozens, to produce a single acceptable replica. And even then, the finest ancient examples often exceed what modern knappers can achieve. This isn't because ancient people were biologically different. Their brains and hands were the same as ours. The difference is practice. Modern experimental knappers might have a few thousand hours of experience. Prehistoric craftspeople had tens of thousands. There is also the matter of transmitted knowledge. A modern knapper works largely alone, learning from books and occasional workshops, A prehistoric napper learned from masters who had learned from masters in an unbroken chain stretching back generations. Each generation refined what they received. Techniques that saved time or improved results spread through communities. Mistakes were made and corrected. The accumulated wisdom of centuries informed every decision. We simply don't have access to that wisdom anymore. Consider what is involved in transmitting craft knowledge across generations. The master must recognize what is teachable and what must be learned through practice. The apprentice must be patient enough to absorb years of lessons. The society must value this transmission enough to support it. In our modern world, we rarely invest in this kind of deep transmission. Formal education is broad but shallow. Job training is focused on immediate needs. Few people spend decades apprenticed to masters, absorbing not just techniques but judgment, intuition, and accumulated wisdom. Maybe that is why we struggle to replicate prehistoric achievements. We have the information. We can describe the tools in exquisite detail, but we lack the formation, the shaping of mind and hand that comes only from years of guided practice. This is starting to change. There is growing interest in reviving traditional crafts, in learning from indigenous peoples who maintain ancient practices. Some researchers are trying to rebuild the transmission chains that have been broken for centuries or millennia. It is slow work. You can't compress decades of learning into months. You can't substitute reading for doing, but gradually, step by step, some of the lost knowledge is being recovered. Not completely, probably never completely, but enough to deepen our respect for what our ancestors achieved. Let me tell you about one more mystery that fascinates researchers: the relationship between tool sophistication and behavioral complexity. We usually assume that better tools mean smarter makers, but the evidence is more complicated than that. Some prehistoric groups with simple tools showed complex behavior, art, ritual, long-distance trade. Other groups with sophisticated tools left little evidence of symbolic thought. Technology and cognition don't always track together. Maybe tool sophistication reflects different things in different contexts. In some environments, the best strategy is simple, robust tools that are quick to make. In others, investment in precision pays off. The best tool depends on circumstances, not on cognitive capacity. This is important because we sometimes use tool technology to judge ancient peoples. These people only had simple tools, so they must have been primitive. But simple doesn't mean unsophisticated. Sometimes simple is exactly right. The people who made simple tools might have had rich inner lives, complex social structures, and profound understanding of their world. We'll never know most of that. It didn't preserve. But we shouldn't assume absence of evidence equals evidence of absence. And conversely, sophisticated tools don't necessarily mean sophisticated people in every way. A culture might invest heavily in tool technology while remaining simple in other respects. Technology is just one dimension of human achievement. What the puzzling prehistoric tools tell us, ultimately, is how little we know. Each mysterious artifact is a reminder that our ancestors had capabilities, motivations, and worldviews that we can only dimly perceive. The past is a foreign country. They do things differently there. But here is the paradox. Those distant ancestors are also us. The same species, the same basic nature. Whatever they felt when they completed a perfect tool, pride, satisfaction, joy, we feel those same emotions when we complete something we've worked hard on. When you struggle with a difficult task and finally succeed, you are experiencing something your ancestors knew intimately. When you look at your own work with a critical eye, deciding it could be better, you are following an ancient impulse. That connection bridges the gap between us and them. We can never fully understand their world, but we can recognize the fundamental humanness in their achievements. The drive for excellence, the patience to master difficult skills, the joy of making something beautiful. These daggers served no practical purpose. They were too fragile to cut anything. They must have been purely ceremonial, objects of beauty and status, demonstrations of supreme skill. But they required abilities we assumed didn't exist yet. In Egypt, we find similar mysteries. Predynastic Egyptians, before the pyramids, before writing, created ripple, flaked knives of extraordinary beauty. The flaking creates a pattern like waves across the surface. It is purely decorative. It serves no functional purpose. How do you create ripple flaking? We're not entirely sure. Modern knappers have developed techniques that approximate the effect, but none that match the finest Egyptian examples. Some secret of their craft has been lost. This pattern repeats around the world. Peak stone tool craftsmanship often appears just before a technology is abandoned, as if right before switching to metal, ancient craftspeople pushed stone to its absolute limits. One last demonstration of mastery before moving on. In Mesoamerica, obsidian workers created blades so sharp they're still used today in some surgical procedures. Modern steel scalpels can't match the edge quality of the best obsidian blades. We've gone backward in this one specific capability. Obsidian is volcanic glass. It fractures along molecular planes, creating edges just a few molecules thick. Ancient Mesoamerican craftspeople understood this material so well they could produce surgical quality instruments thousands of years before antiseptic surgery. And they didn't just make blades, they made mirrors, ear spools, intricate figurines, ceremonial objects of stunning complexity, all from a material that shatters if you look at it wrong. The level of control is almost unbelievable. Here is something that makes the puzzle even stranger. In many cases, the most sophisticated tools come from the most unexpected places. Areas we think of as peripheral or primitive sometimes show the most advanced craftsmanship. The Clovis points of North America are a perfect example. These spearheads, used by some of the first Americans around 13,000 years ago, are among the finest stone projectile points ever made anywhere in the world. Clovis points have a distinctive flute, a channel flaked off the base on both sides. This fluting is extraordinarily difficult to do without breaking the point. It serves no obvious functional purpose, and yet Clovis hunters did it consistently. Why add this risky, unnecessary step? The fluting weakens the point at its widest part. It makes the tool harder to produce. Experiments show that fluted points don't penetrate better than unfluted ones. The flute is a mystery. Some researchers think the flute helped with hafting. attaching the point to a spear shaft, but simpler methods work just as well. Others think it was an identifier, a way of marking tribal affiliation. But that is speculation. The most intriguing theory is that the flute was a test of skill, a way of proving you had mastered stone tool technology at its highest level. If you could make a fluted point without breaking it, you had earned your place among the elite hunters. But this raises another question: who taught the first Americans to make Clovis points? Their ancestors in Asia didn't use this technology. The technique seems to have developed in the Americas. How did newcomers to a continent invent one of the most sophisticated stone tool traditions ever seen? The standard explanation is rapid innovation. The first Americans encountered new environments, new animals, new challenges. They adapted quickly, developing new tools to meet new needs. The Clovis point emerged from this creative explosion, but that doesn't explain the flute. Innovation usually means finding simpler, more efficient solutions. The flute is the opposite. A complex, risky addition that doesn't improve performance. It is sophistication for sophistication's sake. Let me tell you about another category of puzzling artifacts. Tools that seem to show knowledge their makers shouldn't have had. Objects that suggest understanding of physics, materials, or engineering that we thought came much later. In the 1960s, archaeologists in Turkey discovered a site called Fake. It is one of the earliest known cities, dating to around 9,000 years ago, and the obsidian mirrors found there are remarkable. These mirrors are ground and polished to optical quality. They create clear reflections, not the distorted images you'd expect from a hand-worked stone surface. Somehow, prehistoric craftspeople achieved a level of polish that requires understanding of how light interacts with surfaces. Modern experiments show this requires specific techniques, using progressively finer abrasives, maintaining consistent pressure, understanding when to stop. It is not something you stumble into by accident. It is engineering knowledge, and Fake isn't unique. Polished stone mirrors appear in multiple early civilizations, often before other sophisticated technologies, as if the knowledge of optics preceded the knowledge of metalworking, writing, or monumental architecture. Here is another example that fascinates researchers. Some prehistoric stone bowls are so perfectly circular, so uniformly thick, that modern engineers struggle to explain how they were made without a lathe. In Egypt, granite bowls have been found that are perfectly symmetrical, with walls of uniform thickness throughout. The insides are polished smooth. Modern attempts to replicate them with ancient tools have failed. How do you hollow out a granite bowl evenly without being able to see inside as you work? How do you maintain consistent wall thickness by hand? How do you polish the interior of a vessel with a narrow opening? We don't know. Some researchers propose lost technologies, tools and techniques that haven't survived in the archaeological record. Wooden implements that rotted away, methods passed down orally and eventually forgotten, entire craft traditions that left no trace. Others suggest we underestimate what is possible with patience. Ancient craftspeople had time we can't imagine. A single bowl might represent months or years of careful work. Our modern attempts, done in days or weeks, can't match that investment. There is probably truth in both explanations. Some knowledge has genuinely been lost, and some achievements required patience we can barely conceive of, but neither fully satisfies. The gap between what we find and what we can explain remains. Let me tell you about another aspect of prehistoric tool making that puzzles researchers: the evidence of long-distance trade and resource acquisition. Some tools are made from materials that don't exist anywhere near where they were found. In Europe, obsidian from specific volcanic sources shows up hundreds of kilometers away. Flint from known quarries appears at distant sites. These materials weren't just picked up locally, they were transported across vast distances, either through trade networks or deliberate expeditions. This means prehistoric people had geographical knowledge far exceeding what we might expect. They knew where the best materials were. Even if those places were weeks of travel away, they had social connections that allowed materials to move across the landscape. In some cases, the effort to acquire specific materials seems disproportionate to their practical advantage. Local stone would have worked almost as well. But people traveled great distances, or traded extensively, to get the special stuff: status, perhaps ritual significance, or just preference for quality. Here is something even more intriguing. At some prehistoric sites, we find evidence of mass production. Not individual craftspeople making tools one at a time, but something like workshops producing standardized tools in quantity. At Grimes Graves in England, Neolithic people dug over 400 mine shafts to extract high-quality flint. Some shafts went down 40 feet. They built ladders, lit torches, risked cave-ins, all to get the best raw material for their tools. This wasn't casual collecting. This was industrial-scale extraction, organized labor, specialized knowledge, significant capital investment. 5,000 years ago, before metal, before writing in Britain, people were running mining operations. The flint from Grimes Graves was traded across Britain. Tools made from this distinctive material appear at sites hundreds of miles away. Someone was organizing extraction, production, and distribution on a scale we usually associate with much later societies. Similar patterns appear at prehistoric quarry sites around the world. The Lake Superior copper deposits were extensively mined thousands of years ago by Native Americans. Obsidian sources in Anatolia, East Africa, and Mesoamerica show evidence of organized extraction going back millennia. All of this requires more than just technical skill in making tools. It requires social organization, long-term planning, resource management, and probably some form of record keeping, even if that record keeping was entirely mental or oral rather than written. Here is another puzzle that relates to tool sophistication. It is not a tool exactly, but it represents the same kind of puzzling sophistication carved from mammoth ivory around 40,000 years ago. It stands about 30 centimeters tall, a human body with a lion's head. Modern experimental archaeologists have tried to replicate this carving, using only the tools available to its creator. Their estimate: at least 400 hours of work. That is 10 weeks of full-time labor, spent on a single object 40,000 years ago. Think about what that means for the society that produced it. They had enough surplus, enough food, enough security. that someone could spend 10 weeks carving a figurine instead of hunting. They valued art enough to support an artist. This was not a crude survival culture, and the technique itself is extraordinary. The carver understood ivory's grain intimately. They knew how to work around natural cracks and weaknesses. They achieved proportions and details that required sophisticated spatial reasoning. All this before agriculture, before cities, before writing. The Lion Man isn't unique. It is part of a tradition across Ice Age Europe. We find hundreds of carved figurines, animals, humans, hybrid beings. Some are crude. Others display extraordinary skill. This was a culture that valued visual art and supported those who created it. The famous Venus figurines, small sculptures of women with exaggerated features, appear across a vast geographical range, from France to Russia, spanning 20,000 years. Same basic concept, same basic style, separated by thousands of miles and hundreds of generations. How did this artistic tradition spread so widely and last so long? We're talking about people who traveled on foot, who had no permanent settlements, who left almost no trace of their passing, and yet they shared an artistic vocabulary that spanned a continent. Let me take you to another part of the world with its own inexplicable artifacts. Australia's Aboriginal peoples have one of the world's oldest continuous cultures, and their stone tools have mysteries of their own. The oldest ground edge axes in the world come from Australia, dating to at least 50,000 years ago. Grinding stone edges is a later development in most of the world, but in Australia, it appeared almost immediately after human arrival. Why did Australian toolmakers develop grinding so early? The standard explanation is that Australian stone required different techniques. The local materials, certain types of basalt and greenstone, benefit from grinding in ways that European flints don't. But that just pushes the question back. How did people who had just arrived on a new continent immediately develop the perfect technique for local materials? How did they know that grinding would work better than flaking for these specific rocks? The answer might be that they brought knowledge with them, that stone grinding was already known to the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians, but archaeologists haven't found evidence of it in Southeast Asia. The trail of transmission has been lost, or it might be that necessity accelerated innovation. In Australia's challenging environments, having the right tools quickly could mean the difference between survival and extinction. The pressure to adapt was intense. Aboriginal Australians also developed some of the world's most sophisticated hafting techniques. Hafting means attaching a stone tool to a handle. It sounds simple, but it is actually complex chemistry and engineering. Aboriginal craftspeople used plant resins, animal sinew, and beeswax to create adhesives perfectly suited to their purposes. They knew which plants produced the stickiest resins, which animal parts made the strongest bindings, how to process and combine materials. Modern analysis of these adhesives shows they have properties comparable to synthetic glues. They remain flexible in heat, don't become brittle in cold, resist moisture, and maintain their grip for years. This is sophisticated materials science. How long did it take to develop these formulas? We don't know. By the time Europeans arrived, the knowledge was ancient. The recipes had been perfected over countless generations, refined by trial and error until they were nearly optimal. Let me tell you about one more category of puzzling prehistoric tools. The ones that might not be tools at all. Objects so strange, so apparently purposeless, that archaeologists can only guess at their function. Spherical stone balls, perfectly round, have been found at sites across the world. Some are the size of baseballs, others the size of bowling balls. They're too smooth to have formed naturally. Someone made them, but why? In Scotland, carved stone balls with intricate geometric patterns date to over 5,000 years ago. They're unique to a small region and a brief time period. They weren't tools, they weren't weapons, they weren't containers. What were they? The carvings are too elaborate for practice pieces. The balls are too uniform to be accidents. Someone invested significant time and skill in making objects that served no obvious purpose. Objects that we still can't explain 5 millennia later. Some researchers think they were symbols of status or authority, like crowns or scepters in later cultures. Others think they were gaming pieces or counters for some kind of accounting system. Still, others suggest ritual or ceremonial functions. The honest answer is we don't know. We may never know. The people who made these objects and understood their purpose are gone. Their knowledge died with them, leaving only the silent stones behind. And that is true of so much prehistoric technology. We have the products, but not the process. We have the tools, but not the training. We can study what ancient people made, but we can only guess at how they learned to make it. This brings us to a deeper question. What do these puzzling artifacts tell us about our ancestors' minds? If they could achieve things we struggle to replicate, if they knew things we've forgotten, what does that say about human intelligence? One possibility is humbling. Maybe our ancestors were simply smarter than we give them credit for. Maybe living closer to survival, working with their hands every day, developing skills over decades. Maybe that creates a different kind of intelligence than our modern world produces. We think of intelligence as abstract reasoning, book learning, formal education, but there are other kinds of intelligence, material intelligence, understanding how physical objects behave, craft intelligence, knowing how to shape the world with your hands. These are real and valuable. Modern studies of traditional craftspeople show remarkable cognitive abilities. Blacksmiths, potters, weavers, people who work with materials develop sophisticated mental models of how those materials behave. They can predict outcomes that formal physics struggles to explain. There is a concept neuroscientists call procedural memory. It is the kind of memory that stores skills how to ride a bike, how to type, how to throw a ball once learned. These skills become automatic, almost unconscious. They live in the body as much as the mind. Prehistoric craftspeople accumulated procedural memories of extraordinary depth and precision. Through thousands of hours of practice, they developed intuitive understanding that we can barely approach through intellectual analysis. They knew stone the way you know how to walk. This procedural knowledge isn't fully communicable through language. You can't just describe how to knap a perfect blade. You have to show it, and the learner has to practice it, and gradually the knowledge transfers through demonstration and repetition, not through words. When that chain of transmission breaks, the procedural knowledge is lost. You can't reconstruct it from tools alone. The objects tell you what was achieved, not how it was achieved. The process dies with the practitioners. Maybe our prehistoric ancestors had this material intelligence developed to an extraordinary degree. Living with stone every day, from childhood to death, for generation after generation, they might have understood stone in ways we literally cannot comprehend. But there is another possibility. Maybe these exceptional artifacts represent rare geniuses rather than common abilities. Maybe most prehistoric tools were ordinary, and the amazing ones we find in museums are the 1 in a million masterpieces made by 1 in a million craftspeople. Museums tend to display the best examples, the most beautiful, the most skillful, the most mysterious. We don't fill display cases with crude, broken, typical tools. This creates a distorted impression of what ancient life was actually like. If you went back in time, most of the tools you'd see would be functional but unremarkable. The stunning artifacts that puzzle modern researchers might have been equally rare and remarkable in their own time, created by exceptional individuals, treasured as special. This doesn't make the mysteries less interesting. If anything, it raises new questions. How did those exceptional individuals achieve what they did? What separated the geniuses from the ordinary craftspeople? How was mastery defined and recognized in prehistoric society? There is one more thing to consider as we think about these mysterious tools. The role of time. We modern people have very little of it. Our attention is divided among countless demands. We measure projects in days or weeks. Prehistoric craftspeople had time in abundance, not leisure time. Life was hard, but focus time. When you are making a tool, you are making a tool. There is no email to check, no meeting to attend, no notification pulling your attention elsewhere. What could you achieve if you spent 8 hours a day, every day, for 50 years, working with stone? That is 100,000 hours of practice, more than most modern people spend on any single skill in their entire lives. The 10,000-hour rule suggests it takes that much practice to achieve mastery. Our prehistoric ancestors might have had 10 times that. Mastery beyond mastery levels of skill we can't even imagine because we've never invested that kind of time in anything. And they weren't working alone. They were embedded in communities of craftspeople, learning from masters, competing with peers, passing knowledge to apprentices. The accumulated wisdom of generations informed every strike of stone against stone. We've lost that. Not just the specific techniques, but the entire context that made them possible. The lifelong dedication, the social structures of transmission, the accumulated refinements of countless generations. We can't just rediscover what was lost. We'd have to rebuild an entire way of life. And maybe that is the real mystery of these prehistoric tools that are too advanced to explain. They're not too advanced for humans. They're too advanced for us. Modern people with modern lives, modern distractions, modern impatience. Our ancestors might have been doing just fine. Think about this as you drift off tonight. Somewhere in the past, someone held a piece of stone in their hands. They saw inside it the tool it could become. They worked for hours, days, maybe weeks, shaping their vision into reality. They created something that still amazes us today. We don't know their name. We don't know their story. We don't know what they hoped or feared or believed, but we have what they made. Across thousands of years, their skill speaks to us, their achievement endures. That is something worth holding on to. Not just the mystery of how they did it, but the wonder that they did it at all. That human beings, with nothing but stone and determination, created objects that still exceed our understanding. We are their descendants. Whatever capacity they had for patience, precision, and vision lives in us too. We've channeled it differently into electronics and software and abstract systems, but the underlying human ability is the same. Maybe someday we'll rediscover what they knew. Archaeologists and experimental craftspeople are working on it now, slowly reconstructing the lost techniques. Every successful replication brings us closer to understanding our ancestors' world. Or maybe some mysteries will remain mysteries. And that is okay too. Not everything needs to be explained. Some things can just be wondered at, admired, appreciated for what they are without demanding to know exactly how they came to be. If you are drifting off now, let these images stay with you. Hands working stone by firelight. Patience measured in decades. Masterpieces created for purposes we can only guess at. A world where what mattered was making something beautiful, something perfect, something that would last. Let me leave you with one final thought. In Japan there is a phrase, shokunin kishitsu. That means something like the soul of the craftsman. It describes the drive for perfection that some craftspeople have, the refusal to settle for good enough, the pursuit of excellence beyond any practical need. That soul existed in our prehistoric ancestors. The evidence is in the tools that exceed necessity, the blades too thin to use, the bowls too perfect to explain, the symmetry that serves no function. These are the fingerprints of people who cared about excellence. Somewhere, tens of thousands of years ago, a craftsperson looked at a finished tool and thought, I can do better. Not because the tool didn't work, not because anyone demanded it, just because they knew it was possible, and that was enough. That drive lives in us still. The same impulse that made our ancestors spend hours perfecting a stone blade makes us obsess over our own crafts today. It is part of what it means to be human, the desire to make something as good as it can possibly be. Thanks for spending this time thinking about our ancestors and their inexplicable achievements. There is more to explore on this channel, more mysteries to contemplate, more questions to fall asleep to. Subscribe if you haven't already. Good night. Sleep well, and maybe dream of what it would feel like to hold stone in your hands and see, within its rough surface, the perfect tool waiting to emerge.